Welcome back to Chemdest TV. I must also remind you that this page will be bringing to your knowledge the environmental concerns of researchers. And so on today's episode, we'll be talking about article. And so we cannot just talk about people's finding without mentioning article. Article is just a documented evidence of proved research work of scholars. And so we cannot just say that people have done a work or people have actually researched on a topic without having an evidence that will prove to that effect. And so today we'll be looking at article and talk about the segments of article. An article must be comprehensive enough, must have all the necessary ingredients, before we can actually call it an article. All right, and this article, if anybody, even a layman, should lay his hands on it, the person will be able to reproduce what you claim that you have done in your research. Now, the first segment of an article is the publishing house. Of course, before you can say article is an article, it must have been published by a publishing house. This article was published by International Journal of Environmental Quality, as you can see on the screen. And this journal they have DOI, they have volume, they have issue, they have pages, and each of these are peculiar to that particular article. The next segment there now is abstract. This is just very, very important in an article because it's kind of an executive summary that summarizes all your research work. All right, it must have the introduction in it, as little as it is. It must have introduction, it must have materials and method, it must have your findings, your results, and it must have your conclusion. And that is how articles, abstracts are written. And so, just as small as it is, you must make sure that you concise all your findings so that anybody that will read your abstract will have a clear picture or knowledge of what you are doing. The next segment is introduction. Introduction is kind of different from what we normally do during undergraduate studies or postgraduate studies, as the case may be. Undergraduate studies compresses introduction, statement of problem, and every other required, institutional requisites on them. But when it comes to article writing, you only have a segment called introduction. And so this introduction will have literature review embedded in it, unlike undergraduate studies where you have a segment of literature review. Talk about the title, bringing people's work and people's research, referencing them also in your introduction. And at the last end of your introduction, unlike undergraduate projects, you will now bring out the purpose, you bring out the aim of the research that you want to venture into. The next segment is the title. This title comes after you have seen the journal name or the publishing house. Title, just as the name implies, informs us on what you're actually doing. Once someone picks an article and reads the title of the article, it tells or informs the reader what you are venturing into. As you can see on the screen, this is ecological and environmental health risk. So once you pick out this title, you know that you're talking about ecological risk and health risk that is kind of associated with the samples. These samples can be soil, and most of the times, scholars spend much time trying to figure out a benefiting title to give a journal. The next segment is materials and method. Now, in article, we normally use materials and method. But when it comes to projects, undergraduate projects, depending on the school, we normally use methodology. And there is a very significant difference between two of them. Now, when you're talking about methodology, you're talking about the general method that you use to carry out your research. Methodology, let's say that you are working with soil, you're working with water, and you're working with air. And each of these requires a type of pre-treatment, a type of pre-treatment that is kind of peculiar to that particular sample you're working on. So that becomes method on soil, it becomes method on water, becomes method on air. All right. Now, but the general connotation for this individual method is perhaps known as methodology, and this is so peculiar to undergraduate studies, where they use methodology, and it depends on the institution as well. Now, coming to research, we normally use materials and methods. Now, materials are just all the equipment you use in the lab. All right. You have to list them, majorly all the equipment you use. Then methods is just a peculiar method you use for each of the components you're working on. Now let's say you are working on, just as I gave the instance before, soil, water, and air. You have to give methods for each of these samples on how you actually prepare them in the laboratory. Okay. Now, materials and methods. That is very important when it comes to an article, because it reveals the materials you're working on and the materials you're working with. It reveals your samples. It reveals your sample location. It reveals what you did in the lab before analyzing those samples. So materials and method is one of the key components of an article, and it must be comprehensive enough. The next segment in an article is results and discussion. Of course, we cannot actually know what you did if you have not discussed your results. Most of the times, the results comes as digits. It comes as numbers. And for a layman or anybody that really wants to understand what you did, it might not really mean anything to them, your results, if you have not fully discussed what those digits are to them. And so discussion and results are also very, very paramount when it comes to article, because you have to coherently inform or write about your findings in a language that even a layman will understand. Finally, the last segment is your references. And of course, you have to give credit to those who have done the previous research on what you are doing. And so you must reference them appropriately. And I will actually do a comprehensive video on each of these topics that I've listed today, and especially referencing. Thank you for staying till this moment with me. See you in my next video.